Thank you very much, Simon. It's really good to be here, and thank you for inviting me again. So I want to try and talk to you today about the impact that COVID-19 has had on all different aspects of education, but equally online safety. And as Simon said, my role with Insafe is to coordinate this network of 30 safer internet centres around Europe. And I'm sure lots of you know about that network. It comprises an awareness centre, a helpline, a hotline, and also a youth panel, which is really important that we hear the voice of young people. And of course, ClickSafe in Germany and the Polish Safer Internet Centre are really an important part of that network. So what I want to try and give you this morning is a snapshot of the lessons that we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. And of course, it's still there. It's still something that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I think, if you think about the headlines, they've been absolutely dreadful. The fact that, the instances of online child sexual abuse have gone up, the amount of fake news, the amount of misinformation, the fact that parents are panicking because children and young people are spending more and more and more time glued to a screen, just like many of us are having to do today, I suppose. You can see in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, apparently some people became so fed up with constantly sitting in Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams meetings or Google Classroom or whatever, that they discovered that they could actually make a little video of themselves that would loop again and again. And it looked as though they were very interested in making notes and paying attention. And actually they'd gone away and were drinking coffee or sitting in the sun or something like that. So, the news was all doom and gloom. But I think what we also learned is that people suddenly recognized that technology had a role to play here. It was the way that we kept on learning when we were locked down. It was the way that, adults were able to keep working and run their businesses. It was the way that we kept in touch with family and friends, perhaps, who didn't live with us. And it was really important. And I think that moving forward, I hope that that's a positive, that a lot of the people who doubted the place of technology recognized that, that there was a real strong positive purpose to it. We've been bombarded with research. There has been so much research that's come out in the last few months. I've not been able to keep up with all of it, but I've tried, and I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour on the screen there of some of the research reports that we saw. Lots of them talking about the impact on children and young people, and I'll talk about that later on. Lots of them talking about the fact that criminals were seeing the pandemic as an opportunity to further, the things that they were doing online. I think it's also important to recognise that we need to be wary of some of these headlines. They don't always give an accurate picture. So this one that you can see here, it looks dreadful. 2/3 of children were bullied on private chat apps during lockdown. That's absolutely dreadful. But when you look a little bit more closely, it wasn't 2/3 of all children. It was 2/3 of children who were being cyberbullied said it was through private apps. And actually the number who were being cyberbullied was much, much smaller than 66%. So I think, we need to be careful. And you all know as well as I do that the newspapers like to, generate lots of fear and so on. And it makes a good story. I think one of the things that we became aware of quite early on in the pandemic, in the lockdown, was about the rise in the amount of child sexual abuse material being shared on the internet. And the graph that you can see here was from a research report that Europol did. And it basically shows the number of referrals from NECMEC, so the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, across to Europol. And that's always seen as an indicator of the amount of child sexual abuse material which is being distributed on the surface web, so kind of the main internet, not the dark web. And you can see dreadful, absolutely shocking spike just as everybody went into lockdown. And again, in Europol's report, that they said very clearly that they were aware of conversations between, predators, paedophiles online, who were basically saying, look, everybody is going to be going online. Children are going to be spending a lot more time online than they ever did before. People are a bit vulnerable. Now is the chance for us to actually go and make contact with them. So absolutely dreadful, but, we need to face this and we need to deal with it. If we look just specifically at some of the cases that we had in Germany and Poland, again, you can see the difference, first of all, between 2019 and 2020. But again, and particularly in the case of Poland, the huge spike, again, this was referrals from NECMEC that happened in April. This was backed up really by contacts that were being received from the Insafe helplines. You can see there that even sort of by the middle of 2019, we were already starting to see an increase in calls. I think that's because children and young people were spending more time online. They were needing help when things went wrong, and so brilliant that they were able to get in touch with the helplines. But you can see that, between Q1 and Q2 of this year, that the numbers went up even more, and we saw record numbers actually of young people reaching out to helplines. Not surprising that screen time has gone up. My screen time definitely went up. I'm sure your screen time went up. And I don't think we need to panic too much about that. I think we're kind of all moving away now from talking about screen time, as in how many hours were you online, to talk about screen use. I think it's the quality of what we're doing. And I think we need to make sure that children in particular have a variety of things that they're doing online with regular breaks in between. I think one of the messages that we try to give to parents is that there should be tech-free times in the day, maybe at meal times. But actually, if I'm saying that to my children, I shouldn't be sitting with my phone at the dinner table either. And I think the other message, which has come out as a result of the pandemic, is, no phones in the bedroom overnight. And that's because it will interfere with sleep. It's not because we think they're going to be doing things that they shouldn't be doing on their device overnight. I mean, they might be, that's a different argument, but it's more about sleep. And I think, again, it's okay to be having devices in the bedroom, perhaps, because when we were in lockdown, children weren't walking to school with their friends. They couldn't have those quiet conversations talking about things that were, upsetting them and so on in the way that they could when they were at school. So having that private time with a device is probably fine, but not overnight for the reasons that I've just mentioned. And so, as I say, technology became a lifeline, and I hope moving forward people will recognise that there's a lot of positives here. The use of the internet just went up massively again, as you can see from the graph there. And in some countries like Portugal, for example, there was a 50% increase in internet traffic as we went into lockdown. One of the things that we are seeing now is that some children, now that we're back in schools, I don't know how long for, but we're back in schools in a lot of countries, thank goodness. And I think that they're starting to realise that, now that they're in the classroom environment, they can't be sitting glued to a device looking at online content all the time. And we've certainly heard from teachers around Europe that some children are finding that transition quite difficult, that they're feeling that something's missing. And I think what you as adults already know is that the reason children, and us probably, find it difficult to put the device down is that, that was the intention, that was the plan. All of the apps that we use, the social media sites that we visit, the bits of technology that we use on a day-to-day basis, that they're riddled with persuasive design. They've been designed to keep you using it for as long as possible. And I remember a quote from a guy called Tristan Harris. He set up this thing called the Center for Humane Technology. And he's done it with a lot of, ex-Silicon Valley employees, people who made their fortune by creating the tech that we use today, who've now sort of stepped out and said, look, you need to recognize the impact that this tech can have on you. And the quote, he said, we can try to use our devices more responsibly, try to spend less time on them, but it'll be our willpower against hundreds of engineers who are paid to keep us glued to the screen. So we're going to find it really difficult. Children are going to find it really difficult, and we need to support them, especially at the moment, to manage the time that they spend online. Again, I just wanted to refer to a couple of bits of research here. The three bits that you can see in front of you, they were all done by Europol, but they're short reports. They're very, very readable. I'm happy to share the links afterwards. And they talk about, how people are profiting from the pandemic. And one of the things that they spoke about specifically was to do with sextortion. So offenders are likely to attempt to take advantage of emotionally vulnerable, isolated children through grooming and sextortion. Now, we sadly know that this is the case a few months after this report was published. And if you look at the Insafe data that we collect from the helplines every 3 months, these statistics are showing the increase in call numbers between the first quarter of 2020, so January, February, March, and the second quarter, April, May, June. So a 15% rise in calls about sextortion, 29% in calls about sexting, and the huge one there at the bottom, nearly 200% increase in the number of calls around data privacy. And I think that was concerned around some of the scams that we were aware of. I've put an example on the screen there. And actually, this was a very old scam. This is a scam that has been going on for years. It's the scam when you get an email, and I bet it's happened to some of you. It certainly happened to me. And it says, we've installed some malware onto your device. And for the last 2 or 3 months, we've been videoing you through your webcam. We've got hours and hours of very interesting video footage. We've got a list of all the websites that you've been to. Some of them are not appropriate. And if you don't pay us a certain amount of money, we're going to send all of this stuff to your friends, to your family, to your school. We're going to send it to the people that you work for. It's going to be put up on the internet. You'll be embarrassed. Pay the money, and then that'll be the end of it. Now, most people realize that this is a hoax at this point, but one of the clever things that the criminals did, they managed to include your password in that email. And that's what made people think it must be real. They must have access to my laptop. And they got the password from data breaches. You can go online and find where people's passwords have been identified. Every day we see the headlines which talk about, how data has been lost and so on. Anyway, the COVID twist to it is, if you don't pay us this money, we will send you a package infected with coronavirus. This is your address. We know your address. You'll be putting your family and everybody at risk. And of course, it's a scam. But as you can see, the 16-year-old boy in question, he says, he's worried. He had been watching pornography. He was a teenager. He'd been watching pornography. He thinks they videoed him doing that. And now he's worried about what is going to happen. Another example, you may have seen this video. This came out at the beginning of lockdown, and apparently this is an Aldi store in the Netherlands, and it's besieged by people who are panic buying. There's no pasta, no toilet rolls. Everything is sold out because we're going into lockdown. And to cut a long story short, it's nothing to do with COVID-19. Bellingcat, the investigative journalism website, they managed to sort of track back that video. I mean, it was shared widely on TikTok, on Instagram, millions of times, but they found that it originated from 2011. And actually, the story about how they worked that out is quite interesting. I don't have time to share it now, but again, I'm happy to share links for people afterwards. The point I would make here is that I think we all have a responsibility, adults as well as children. You see those stories. The researchers say if my friends have posted things like that, people who I know have liked things like that, A, I'll be more likely to believe it, and B, I'll be more likely to share it myself. So, when you see this stuff, before you click share or you forward it to people, we need to be trying to break that chain. Where does it come from? Is it genuine? Can I verify it? And as I say, I think adults have got to do that as much as young people. Sadly, I think adults don't set the right example. These are just 2 examples of things that we saw just in the last month or 2, really, of trends, if you want to call them that, on TikTok. There was one trend where parents were purposely throwing or spilling cold water onto their very young children and then filming their reaction. And this was particularly difficult for TikTok because they said, if it's a joke and the child laughs and is okay with it, then, we probably wouldn't remove that. If the child was really distressed, then perhaps we would. The example on the right of the screen, this was dreadful. So this was before children started school at the beginning of this academic year, and parents were showing them photographs of somebody with a disability and saying, this is going to be your new teacher. And then the child would look horrified or scared, perhaps because of the image and they didn't understand it. And the parents would video that and put that on TikTok and everybody would laugh. The point I'm trying to make here is that, parents are not setting the right example. They've spent a lot of time online. They're bored. And, some of the things that they've come up with really don't model the sort of behavior we want children to have. So just the last few little bits. As I said to you before, there's so much research that I could share with you. And I thought I'd just look at a couple of bits in a little bit more detail. This first one is to do with gaming, so the impact that COVID-19 had on video gaming. And it's a European report from IFSI, so the Interactive Software Federation of Europe. So it's the gaming industry in Europe, if you like. And, I think the first thing to say, of course, people spent a lot more time online. They spent a lot more time gaming when the pandemic started and we were locked down. But since then, most players have resumed their usual amount of time that they spent, which I think is really positive. So although some have kept the bad habits, perhaps, or the habits where they're spending too much time online, not all of them have. And you can see here the breakdown. So the numbers did spike in April or May, but then, in all of the countries, they have gone down. So, it's understandable that they were spending more time, but, perhaps it's going back to normal fairly quickly. Equally, in this particular one, this is really positive. Parents were saying, actually, playing online games has helped my children with their schooling and their education. And the thing that I think is really positive that I hope we can hold on to moving out of the pandemic when that happens is that parents said, I was playing video games with my children. I had more time. I wasn't going to work. I was working from home. And so I spent time playing stuff with my children during lockdown. This is really positive as well. 3 in 10 young people said playing these online games helps me to feel less anxious. I'm forgetting about COVID-19 for a few minutes or an hour. It's helping my mental health. And equally, I didn't feel quite as isolated. So I was playing multiplayer games with other people, and that meant that I didn't feel quite so isolated. The other bit of research that I want to quickly reference, and I'm aware that I'm almost up to time now, so forgive me if I'll just take another minute or so. This was a bit of research that came out at the end of August, done by Internet Matters, who are based in the UK. And I think, for years, we've tried to get teachers to use more technology in the classroom, and it's not always easy. I know a lot of you who are watching this now will be avid users of technology in the classroom, but it's not the case for everybody. And so 56% of teachers said, when we suddenly had to move to this remote learning, this online teaching, our school wasn't very well prepared to do that. We had to move very quickly, and almost half found, it was very difficult to adapt their teaching. They found that hard. It wasn't intuitive for them. I think one of the other concerns is that now that children have gone back, are they getting a broad, balanced curriculum? Of course, we want them to do English and maths and things like that. But what about those extra things, art and music and creative subjects, which are so important to children's learning? But as you can see from the stats on the screen there, some of those, important things that enrich the curriculum, they've disappeared. And I think there is a concern across the world that children are not where they should be in terms of their education. And some schools, sadly, are saying, right, let's focus on the core subjects, the things that we think are important. That's all we've got time for. And I think it's important to recognise that not everybody is connected. So again, this is in the UK, but 67% of pupils apparently had an internet connection, which is really surprising because I think we think, oh, most children are connected. well, they might be connected through their smartphone, but a lot of the learning that was pushed out to children, it didn't work on a smartphone, it didn't work on a tablet device. It worked if you had a desktop or a laptop, but not perhaps on those more portable types of devices that young people had. One of the things that we've done as part of the Insafe network is we've collated the huge amount of resources across the Insafe network, so across Europe, which have been created to support learning during lockdown, during the sort of COVID-19 situation. Every country was producing this stuff. The Polish and the German Safer Internet Centres, part of that. And, it's a really good place to go where you will find a huge amount of information, policies that perhaps it would be useful to have in the school, things that you might want to think about if you are setting up remote learning. And this is my penultimate slide, really. I think, we need to think carefully about the equity of provision. Was what we did accessible to everybody? Were all young people able to access in the way that they needed to? Perhaps a household was connected, but they had one device and there were 3 children and 2 adults all trying to use the same device. And I think, we've got some time. Yeah, we've had some time rather. So we need to make sure that what we offer is going to be better in the event of a second lockdown. And the other thing I think is really important, and you all know this as professionals, children are vulnerable. Are we aware of those vulnerable children? How do we look after them when they're not at school? How can you tell in a sort of remote learning situation whether somebody is struggling and needing support? And I think, one of the things that we have to do in schools certainly is to keep the dialogue going, to keep the channels of communication open so that parents and children feel that they can come and talk. Moving forward, I think this absolutely has to be a partnership. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really happy to sort of speak to any of you and share more information, links to the research and so on if it's helpful. But you will find a lot more information on the Insafe website. But thank you for listening. Hope that was helpful.